Untangled. I'm Kristin Clark, and I'm a career exploration coach for 16 to 26-year-olds. And while I'm talking, Bobby's going to change the title of our talk today because we're not going to talk about ACT math tests.
Yeah.
We are talking about gap years and how important they are. Because I know that a lot of parents are concerned about if their child comes to them and says, what do we do with a gap year? So, one of the things that I've found, Bobby, is that,
right. Yeah. It's got a really bad reputation, because people would just say, oh, you're being lazy.
Oh, for sure. Right. And I know parents are worried because their biggest thought is, oh, my kid's not going to go back to school, and what I found is, I think back in the day, that truly was more prevalent. But I think the difference today is kids, what I've seen in the research is they're about 5 years behind where we were maturity-wise at that age. So, that's something I think that we really have to consider on this. Yeah. So for parents, sometimes a gap year, a little pause is not a bad thing for a kiddo at this
Absolutely.
moment in time.
And I think, parents need to, because we had different things drilled into us when we were younger that like, oh, if you don't go, you'll never go, and things like that. And so I think you need to understand that things are different now and think about it. And so I think they're probably like and like, what questions should you ask your kid to find out if it's like a good idea?
Yeah.
Right? If they're really thinking about this.
Yeah. So I think for parents, the one question, I do have 4 questions that I think that you should ask. The first one is this: what do we want our child to gain in 12 months? So it's this idea of purpose over pause, right? A gap year does not mean let me lay around and play video games every day. That's not what this is about. It's about, what do we want? Is it maturity? Is it, just finding that direction? And if so, how are we going to get there, right? Yeah. How are we going to move them closer to a career path is another question that you should be asking, because that's what this is about, right? Is how are we going to take that year and move them closer to a career path? So if your child is interested, I've got a client right now where she just feels like she wants to be a welder. Okay. And I was like, then get out there and weld. Do you know somebody that welds now? Go get in their garage and, just try it. Don't let them sit there and just think that's what they want to do. Take action, right? So how are you going to make that happen? The next question I'd ask Bobby is, who are you going to have guide them? Because you've got to have a support network to make this happen, and don't let them just drift. Yeah. And having a job while they're doing that, whether that job is setting them up for their career or not, having that sense of purpose and I'm doing something is going to be hugely important, because I always want parents to remember, and all their buddies are heading off to college and they're sitting at home. There's some some things happening there where they feel like everybody else is heading and doing something. You got to make sure that they've got purpose, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is the thing is, for a lot of students, at least I know, like that year, sometimes, a student just isn't ready right now and needs to understand more about like what it's like to work, what it's like to be in business. And then after doing that for a year, then they are ready to commit to college in a way, and they have more of an idea of what their major should be and all of that. And so they can really hit the ground running. And as we talk about so often, right, if you aren't ready, that's when you go and then you just drop out, and then you've got this pile of debt for no reason. So.
Right, which it takes me to my 4th question, and that is, what's the reentry plan? So if we're sitting here right now going, you know what, we're going to take a gap year, we still have to understand, okay, that college that accepted you, what are they going to say? So talking to the college and saying, you know what, I'm thinking about this gap year, how does that affect my getting into your school next year? How does that affect the scholarship you offered me? So getting ahead of all that and making sure that, you're still good to go.
Absolutely. And I think this is an important point, is that like, if you've got a junior in high school or something, they say, well, my plan is I'm going to take a gap year before I go to college. So I don't need to take the SAT or ACT, and I don't need to like apply to colleges or any of that. That's probably not the case, right? You should still go through that process. You need to get that SAT or ACT score, because you don't want to like take it a year after I've had a year after you've graduated, right? So you need to get all that done and apply to the colleges and talk to the colleges and find out what is their policy about gap years. Get your acceptance, get it all, and then say, okay, I'm going to defer this for a year, right?
But Bobby, let's talk about why, right? It's not that you can't take those tests, it's you forget it.
Yeah, you're just not going to be prepared anymore because you haven't had the rigor of school and all that. And yeah, I mean, it's testing this math that's already a couple of years old for you, right? So, yeah, knock that stuff out. Be prepared to go to college, and just this is what always our story is getting parents comfortable with the idea that the student needs to be the one who's ready to go to college, and not every student has to be ready to go to college. It's not the right answer for every student. And you've got to talk to your student. You've got to ask questions and find out. And you might find out that if you don't just immediately accuse them of being lazy, you might find out that they've got good reasons and good ideas about what's best for themselves.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for a second, Bobby, because Jones is when this stuff's going on. And I think it's really important for parents to get comfortable with really looking at your kid and thinking about what's right for that kid right now, and not getting caught up in the momentum, right? And there's a lot of momentum that goes along or happens in schools at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So slowing down for a second and just going, is this best for my kid?
Yeah.
And this is a blip on the radar. Bobby, this is nothing.
Right.
1 year is so a non-issue, right? So you know me, love research. And so here's what we found. 60% of students report that their gap year either set them up on their current major career path, or that they've set them up on what they were already thinking about. So 60% said, you know what, it was a good experience for me to do that. 90% of gap year students enroll in or return to college within a year. So that's really more about re-enrollment and return rate. We've got also the gap year students tend to return more self-aware, motivated, and with clearer goals. And they also say that gap year students get higher GPAs because of that maturity, and they know why they're there, right? They have a reason to be there. So the gap year, I just want people to be less afraid of it, because all the studies are showing that gap year students actually do better.
This is really fascinating, because I mean, that number, that's a very high number, 90%, right? Or whatever, returning and and continuing. And like, that's really interesting, because that's kind of the reverse of this other number we had of all those students who don't finish that we talk about so often, right? So that's where you get the number. What is it, like 30% of students don't make it through, right? Or don't, right?
Yeah, that's
after the first year, whatever it is. What's that statistic?
30% of students that go to college don't return for their sophomore year.
Right. And so then you've got 90% of those who take a gap year come back. I mean, this is the reverse. It's the whole
no, don't get the research messed up.
Tell me
so keep in mind, for the gap year, this is an intentional gap year.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the 30% that I'm talking about, they're going tap, I'm out.
Right.
Don't want to come back.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So if you go at 18 to college, 30% of the people who do that give up after the first year, right? But then those who take a gap year, they're coming back and finishing, right? That's a huge distinction. It is the opposite. It's really So it is all about that maturity level, and that's what those 30%.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces. It's maturity level, and it's they know why they're there, right?
Yeah.
And they're committed. They're like, okay, I understand what the outcome is, and I want to be here. And I think that both are very important distinctions. So, you know, at the end of the day, what we're saying is, if they're going to take a gap year, you need to have structure in place. You need to know what is going to happen during that year. You need to have the conversations about what they're going to be doing as far as jobs. You need to have conversations about career, and then what it's going to look like to get into college and having all that laid out. And when that happens, there's no fear here about the gap year. Yeah,
for sure.
So,
well, that's great. I think that's great information and great new research. I love it.
Yeah. And if anybody has questions, you know, throw them in the comments. But guys, the gap year, it's a good thing. And especially these days when our kids are struggling a little bit mental health wise, maturity wise, and, you know, sometimes they just need that gap year. So don't be afraid of it. Blip on the radar.
Excellent. Well, this is great. Yeah. All right. I will see you next week and we will continue these discussions.
All right.